Thanks for tuning in for this week's live Q&A. Today we are going to harvest a little bit of honey because it is almost springtime. We need to start thinking about clearing out a bit of honey in the super boxes to make sure there's room for the hive to move that honey up into the super, making room for the queen to lay below. You don't want to get into the situation where your hive is honey bound, and honey bound is the phrase for when there's honey all through the brood frames and there's nowhere for the queen to lay, and that will really be a trigger for the hive to swarm. So spring management is about making some room in the hive one way or another, and harvesting the honey is one of those things. So I'm just putting that key in, giving it a turn like that, and we're harvesting this very frame just here. So pretty soon the honey should start draining out from beneath the bees' feet. Now it's been a very cold night still, so we're still early days here as far as spring is concerned, but the days will be warming up soon. We're already starting to see some nectar coming in, so good idea to harvest any remaining stores and make that room in the hive. If you've got questions, put it in the comments below. We'll get to answering those. We're also going to be doing a flow frame inspection, not on this hive, but on another hive down there, and just tips and tricks on removing and inspecting flow frames as well. So stay tuned for that and put your questions in the comments. The idea is we'll be answering those as we go. Now, honey's moving slow this morning because we've had quite a cold night, and it's an edge frame. I pulled the window off, which will increase the speed that the honey warms up, but it's slow to warm. It's quite a thermal mass, but if I look down the tube I can see it really starting to drip down all of those different cell lines, and there it is coming right there. And over the next few minutes it'll pick up speed as it starts pouring into this jar, and it's such a mesmerizing and beautiful experience just watching honey. I never get sick of it flowing directly out of the hive like this. And if you see, it's got no kind of impurities in it, it's just ready for the table. I'm going to taste that, see what it's like. Yum yum. Questions in the comments and we'll get to answering those. We're going to leave this to harvest, but if we're going to walk away and do other things in the apiary, it's a good idea to cover up the jar, make sure the bees aren't going to all pile in there, because sometimes they'll get a taste for honey rather than flowers, and it'll promote robbing and so on. So if you see that happening, cover it up, and that will simply mean that the bees can't pile into the jar. Okay, let's head down and start with our flow frame inspection on these hives here, out of interest to see what's going on, see how much honey is coming in, and a bit of a gauge of where the hives are up to, because you want to make sure you're ahead of the curve, harvesting honey, taking your splits, making space in the hive, doing your spring management, and spring is just around the corner for us. So chime in if you're in the northern hemisphere. Obviously you're in the opposite season and you're coming into your fall, which means you'll be making sure there's enough honey for your bees to survive through potentially a long cold winter, depending on whereabouts you live. So we've already got a smoker going here. I'm going to smoke my hands, get in my bee suit, and then we're going to take off the roof, pop some of these frames out and get a good look at what's going on. If you've got questions, chime in. It's also a good idea to just observe from the outside of the hive as well. Now that's what we've made these windows for. So if you have a look at this, you can see they must have a fair bit of honey in there because they're starting to put some on the window side. But they're not full yet, obviously, or you'd see that beautiful honey pattern full in all of these cells. A fun thing to do is get right in close, and you can use your phone sometimes to zoom in, and you can actually watch the bees depositing nectar with their feathery tongues and splashing around the cell walls, moving it around, reducing that water content, and then finally capping it off there. So we can tell from that that they're not full. So we're ahead of the curve here, but it'd be interesting to have a look at the other windows and also at the front. Now there I can see some capped honey, but that isn't a filling pattern. A filling pattern is where you see it all glistening and slowly capping. This is actually where they've consumed honey, where it was capped. And then around here, I can't see any nectar, so they have actually uncapped and eaten it out in sections. So not enough of a honey flow yet to really see that glistening nectar pattern you see when they're really able to collect a lot of it, bring it in and fill all the cells with glistening nectar ready to turn into honey. Okay, so what we're going to do next is take this roof off, and then we're going to pop the inner cover off. You don't need a super lifter for your flow frame inspection, so it's simply, I might remove that as well, getting your chisel end of your hive tool underneath and lifting it. Before we do that, let's add a little smoke. I did add some smoke already, but don't miss that step. A little bit of smoke in the entrance. We're going to leave that smoker on the entrance side just to give them a whiff of smoke as the foragers return, to make sure they change modes to a nice calm mode so that we can get in here and get up close and personal with the bees. Okay, some tips on inspecting the flow frames. First of all, removing these covers helps, and there is 3 points to lift. One is under here. We don't tend to use that one unless they get really stuck. There's one under here. You might not notice it, but there's a little gap there. You can get your tool under and then start to lift. And the other one is a more conventional one under the end bar. So we can lift that one up. Then I can already feel there's a bit of weight in this frame, which I was expecting. Seeing that honey splashed around in those end cells means that they have been filling the center. Look at that beautiful honey there, and some glistening nectar around the edges. So in another week or so, this hive should be full out to the edges. Some beautiful nectar there that they're just capping off to. Look at that, shining in the sunlight. It's a wonderful thing, the springtime with all the flowers flowering, and when you get that moment where nectar's just about dripping to the ground, your bees are thriving, they're racing out and collecting it and bringing it back, and you get to enjoy and try and share in those flavours that they bring in. Okay, time for Q&A. Is there any questions coming in, Trace?
Yes, it's just wondering, we've got a couple of people saying the bees are doing really well, had the hive, well this one in particular, Frankie, had the flow super on since May. The bees hang out there, they seem to love it, but they're just not doing anything in the flow frames. Have you got any tips or tricks?
So the recipe for getting the bees working on the flow frames is a lot of bees when you open the windows, which it sounds like you're starting to see, and a good nectar flow. When those two things coincide, can happen very quickly. But if you're getting impatient, you can speed things up a little bit if you want to by just pulling some burr comb off the top of the brood frames like that. So you're scraping it off and simply just press it into the center of your flow frame, put that on the window side, and you can enjoy watching them recycle that wax, coat all the cells and complete the cells, and that will get them working on that area of the frames, but you still actually won't get any stores until there's a good nectar flow and you've got enough bees and enough surplus honey for you to share some too. So like many agricultural pursuits, an element of patience is key as well, but that's one trick you can use if you just want to speed them up a little bit and get them up there working on your flow frames. Some people do melt wax and paint it on. If you are going to do that, just be mindful not to pour the wax into the cells or you'll jam the whole thing. You just paint lightly over the top with melted wax. But I don't find it necessary. In fact, I do nothing. I just let the bees wax them up when they're ready and when they need the space. Okay. Any more questions?
Yes, Cedar, we've got Scott's up in Brisbane, just a few hours north of here. Just wondering, what do you think about the hives growing really well in the last few weeks? Is adding an ideal super a way to minimise the potential for swarming?
Yes, so there's various different ways to do your spring management, and a lot of spring management is about limiting your hive from swarming because there's so much resources coming in. The bees then are stimulated, or the queen starts laying more eggs, which means you get more bees and eventually you get overcrowding. So as you say, adding more boxes helps a lot. So you could add an ideal and that would reduce the chance of your hive swarming. You can also take honey away from the super like we're doing today by harvesting honey just prior to spring or in spring. If you notice there's a lot of honey, you can harvest some and that will mean they can move honey from down here up to there, alleviating that honey bound issue where all the cells that the queen's trying to lay in are full of honey. So other things you can do, which we showed you last week, is cut out some comb from the edges of the brood nest and put the frames back in the middle. Now that's easy if you have naturally drawn comb, you can do it right there in the field. If you're using foundation, you have to pre-prepare a foundation frame and switch it. So good idea to do a couple of them, a couple of fresh frames centrally in your hive for the bees to draw and the queen to then have new area to lay in. That's a great one as well. But taking splits is one of my go-to methods because as you see the hive really building up, then taking away half the frames down here really relieves a lot of congestion, and you also get another hive, which is great. And if you don't want another hive, then you can really help somebody else get going in beekeeping, or you could even sell that nucleus, it's called, where you've got just a small split from a hive. So plenty of options for spring management. Take your splits, make room in the hive by harvesting honey, add more boxes, whichever takes your fancy.
Great, thanks Cedar. This is a good one from Justin. Justin's wondering, do all varieties of bees work the flow frames? Wondering, like, do Carnolian prefer them more than the Buckfast or vice versa? With all the different varieties of bees, do some prefer different cell sizes, and so then will they not work in the flow frames? Okay,
so you're talking about breeds of bees, and all the Apis mellifera, which, as you say, Buckfast, Carnolian, Caucasian, Italian, they're all Apis mellifera and they all work well with the flow hive. Now, branching out from that, you've got subspecies or different bees where you've got, say, Apis cerana, which is the Asian honeybee, which is quite a lot smaller, has smaller hives altogether, behaves quite differently, has different traits, and it has successfully been used with flow frames by making little mini hives for them with half-size flow frames, if you like. You're taking some of the segments out and shortening them. And then there's the Cape honeybee of South Africa, which is a different one as well, and it has been proven to work with the flow frames. So you'll be fine with any of the European honeybees, Apis mellifera, no matter what breed they are, they will go ahead and use the flow frames.
Great. I'm just going to shout out to Tammy. I was actually talking to Tammy on the phone literally before I raced out to do Facebook. So Tammy, I'm coming back to you later. But now she's posted a question. She's in California and was, I think, up for almost her second or third hive. She's just wondering, is it too late for her to start a new hive in Northern California?
Okay, Northern California has a more temperate climate like we have here. where we can almost start a hive any time of year. Having said that, you do have to be careful. You don't want to take splits when you're getting really cold nights still and so on. But where you are, it's certainly still nice and warm, and you could still be starting hives, although you have to be mindful of what's ahead, and not knowing exactly where you are can be really quite different, even this location, to 2 hours drive from here. So get some local knowledge, find out whether you can take splits or start hives where you are, and perhaps if you post exactly where you are, other beekeepers can chime in and let you know what the season is like ahead, because if you are taking splits, both the parent and the little colony needs to be able to get to resources. So some heads up on what's ahead in your honey season will let you know whether you can take splits, for instance, or start new hives. If you're doing a swap out from a conventional laying to a flow hive, that could happen anytime. So it also depends on which way you're starting.
Fantastic, Zeta. Now I've got a question. I'm not sure what it's sort of basically saying, do you need to add supers on a flow hive?
So it's a little bit of a different mentality harvesting with a flow hive, because your whole extracting room's built right into the hive. In a conventional sense, what I used to do and what is generally common is, as the season progresses with a conventional Langstroth hive, you're adding more boxes as the season goes, so that you can batch process them in an efficient way. You don't want to fire up the extractor and make a big sticky mess in the workshop with a hot knife and all of that just for a few frames of honey out of a hive, or even a single box worth. You want to batch process it, so you're stacking boxes, and then you choose a time when you want to dedicate your life to extracting honey in the conventional way. With a flow hive, really different. You can watch in the windows, and when you see it nice and full and them capping off those cells, you can harvest honey, store it in jars on the shelf instead of in boxes in your apiary. And what that means is you can run smaller hives, which makes it a little bit easier to manage, and you're not also taking up space in your workshop with all of your sticky boxes and so on. So it has quite an advantage. Having said that, if your hive's too small and gets overcrowded, then it's more likely to swarm. So you're juggling the running it smaller, which is easier and often produces a great amount of honey, over triggering your hive to swarm. So to combat that, you do all the things that we were talking about in spring, which is making some more room in the honey box, potentially add another box, or take a split and keep the hive smaller like this. So there's lots of options. Some local knowledge can help, but often flow hive beekeepers can run it smaller because they can easily tap off the honey when they see it, and make sure your hive isn't getting honey bound, which will trigger that hive to swarm in the springtime. Always long answers.
So different weather now, Cedar. This is someone in freezing cold Texas about to hit some freezing cold winter weather. Mary Ann's just wondering, should she leave the hive on the bottom board? Must have a classic hive through winter in Texas.
Okay, that might be a good moment for some local knowledge. Chime in, let us know whether you would leave your flow super on in a long cold winter. You might need to say exactly where you are as well, because it can differ, as I was saying earlier, exactly where you are. But you can, in colder climates, leave the flow frames on. It doesn't damage the flow frames, but you should definitely remove the queen excluder if you're running one. This is the queen excluder here. You can see it between the frames, that black grid. Queen can't get through, which is useful to stop her laying eggs in your honey collection areas. But if the ball of bees moves up through the hive, consuming honey upstairs here to stay alive during winter, then the queen could be left behind below the excluder, and you'll start the next spring with no queen. So good idea to remove the queen excluder, but it is common to pack down some of the honey supers. So it tends to be the colder you go, the more they like to reduce the size of the hive for a long cold winter, usually down to a single super full of honey and a single brood, but in some cases they say you need even more than that to survive a long cold snowy winter. So local knowledge is key. Ask how much honey you need for your hive to survive the winter, and then you can make up your mind whether you want that honey to be stored in the flow frames or whether you want to have an ideal box or another deep box dedicated to stores for the bees to survive on through winter. So the answer is you could go either way, and why not seek some local knowledge and see what other people are doing in your area.
Right. Cedar, if you've got 2 hives and they're both doing well, but you've realised that one of them is queenless, and you've got another brood box that's really pumping that's got the queen, could you merge those 2 hives if it's too late to be able to purchase a queen?
Absolutely. So that's a good thing to do if you want to save those bees or save the resources, but you think that they won't get it together to raise another queen because you don't have the season ahead. So to merge one colony with another, we usually use the newspaper technique, where you'll be putting that box, let's say you put it on top of this one with a couple of sheets of newspaper in between, poke some holes in it, and that will make sure there's ventilation, but it will also start that process where the bees will chew away at that newspaper, discard it all out the entrance, and that'll be a nice slow merge of the 2 colonies, so there's less likely to get a territorial fight going on between the 2 merged colonies. Okay. I can notice they're just starting to give me little warning nips. Haven't got any stings. I could wear my gloves. I'll smoke my hands to mask my mammal smell, but I will add a bit more smoke to the hive, see if I can keep them in a calm mood for us to do a little bit more show and tell with the hive. Smoking in the entrance there, and then a little bit here, and we'll give them a moment just to settle down. That's it. Any more questions?
Yeah, now a good smoke question actually, Seeds. Larry's wondering what are you using to make the smoke, and does it hurt the bees?
Okay, so I don't think getting smoke blown in your face would be that comfortable, and you can hear when I blow the smoke that they really rile up for 20 seconds or so, and then they calm. But the reason why we use the smoke is it has a overall calming effect, which means then it's possible to do brood inspections without bees really trying to sting, and you could also less bees will come to harm, because when they sting they lose their stingers and it rips out of the worker bees, which means those bees will die. So even though it might not be the best thing, a little bit of smoke will mean less damage to your bees overall, and it's also a great tool for moving bees out of the way. If I smoke these bees here, they will then get out of the way for us to then look at the next frame. So I can go sideways first now, and we're doing a little flow frame inspection. There's 3 lift points, there's one here, and then the J under there. So we'll pull another frame out and have a look at that. Now, you asked what was in the smoker.
Yeah.
And I'm just using the garden mulch, which I'm just using it because it's right here and available, but you can use pine needles, you can use bark from trees, you can use rolled up cardboard. Steer away from things like heavy printed magazines or anything like that, because you don't want those chemicals going in and settling in your nice open honey cells or damaging the bees. So what I'm doing is just adding the garden mulch here, and it's I wouldn't say it's my favourite thing to put in a smoker, but it's available, so it's easy. One of my faves, I think, is the tallow wood bark from near my apiary at home, because it lasts a very long time. It's very dense, whereas the garden mulch you have to top up a lot quicker, and in this case it's the organic sugarcane mulch that we use in the garden. I'll get a little bit more, top up that smoker a little bit. It's been raining so it's a bit wet, but the smoker's going nicely now, so I'll put it in anyway and that'll just keep it going. Now we were pulling out a frame, I was showing you how to do that. This hive is a bit edgy. They're not stinging me, but they're giving me warnings. So, good idea to have your gloves at the ready so you don't get stings on your hands. Now, I'm lifting that out now. Let's have a look. What do we have? All the honey in this region, and you can tell by this pattern they got hungry and ate this section out, but now you've got glistening nectar down the cells, so it tells a story of the season by looking at the frames like this. And we're just curious today, we're showing you how to take the flow frames out. Of course we've designed it so you can harvest by looking in the windows, getting a good gauge of what's going on the inside, and fill up your jars from the outside of the hive. Okay, beautiful. Now, got a little rare moment where there's a little bit of burr comb between the frames. It's unusual with flow frames. Normally they really stick to it, but see the little bit of burr comb there? Happens occasionally. Any more questions?
Yeah. Where did I see it? Oh, that's right. Justin was saying, Seed, sometimes we do our flow hive lives in the little observation hive that we have upstairs that's sort of a half size, and then we get asked, do you think we'll ever come up with those observation hives for sale?
Well, if people really request it, I guess we could. We have a lot of hives to make already, so we don't have it on the cards at the moment, but if people really want the observation hive, let us know. It is fun to have them indoors and really be able to look and see what they're doing and look for the waggle dances and so on.
Oh, great. Now, Cody's just wanting a bit of help. Seeds, he's got a double brood box without a flow super on it yet, and just wondering, when he takes off the top box, what's the best way for him to place it without feeling like he's going to crush all the bees?
Okay, on the end is the answer, and you'll see us doing that. Well,
we don't so much now, do we?
Don't say much now. We've got the super lifter which manages that for you, but you want to upend it in the same way you see with our super lifter videos, where you're popping the box off and tipping it up on an end. And that way, if you have a look at this front here, there's actually no bees on it. So you want to choose a surface that doesn't have the bees. And as you say, if you put it down just flat on the bottom, you will crush some bees. But upending it is good. Don't put it on its side, you'll get a lot of nectar dribbling out. But if you keep the frames in that same plane, then the nectar won't dribble out of any open cells, and that's why with the super lifter we've gone in that direction, where it rolls over and is resting on its end while you do your brood inspection. Okay, it's good to get a little bit of a look in and see what's going on in the hive. We've got a bit of nectar coming in. The bees are starting to build up, which is great. We're keeping an eye on any overcrowding, and we're splitting those colonies before they split themselves, which is basically them doing a split, but half the bees head off with the old queen and set up shop somewhere else.
So Scott's wondering, is there a preferred position to place an ideal super? Should it be below or above the queen excluder?
So it depends on what you're trying to achieve. So Trace, reading out the questions, likes to put it the ideal super right on top of the flow frames, collect a bit of honeycomb and bring that into the office to share. So if you're collecting a honeycomb, it'd go right on top. If you're using it as stores, then people will generally put it above the brood nest and then the queen excluder above that, so that if the bees need to, they can raise some young, put some brood in those ideal frames as well. So in the colder areas, that's a common practice where you go one deep and then an ideal, so the bees can store a bit of honey and a bit more brood in there, and they typically won't use a queen excluder. They'll just rely on the fact that there's enough room for the queen to lay. She's not going to venture up above that honey barrier. So depending on your use, ideal could be used for honeycomb collection or for extra stores and extra room for the queen below the excluder or above the deep brood box.
So on hot days, why do the bees hang all outside the front of the hive?
So bees are incredible at doing the air conditioning, and they will keep that brood nest at 35 degrees C, just below our body temperature, all the time if there's brood in there. And they achieve that by ventilating the hive and collecting water, fanning that and using evaporative cooling techniques to cool that air when needed. And when it's cold, they'll disconnect their wing muscles and vibrate. It's like a shivering motion to warm the hive up, and they're able to maintain that temperature. But of course, if the hive is full of bees, they're not going to get the airflow to cool it down enough. So that's when you see the bees, half of them vacating and hanging off the front of the hive to allow that space for airflow to get the temperature right, so the brood doesn't die down here in the brood nest. So that's a normal thing when it gets really hot, if you've got a very busy hive, for you to get a lot of bees on the front or a bee beard hanging down. Now it's also a sign that you've got healthy numbers, and if you're seeing a lot of bees on the front and you're looking in the windows and you can hardly see the comb, then it's likely you've got an overcrowding issue and your hive might be gearing up to swarm. Now, if you see the bee beard but you hardly see any bees in the window, then it's more likely that your hive is just hot and they're out the front, getting out of the way to allow for adequate ventilation control in the hive.
Great. Dean, I think Dean's in Canada and is just saying, can you provide tips? What should they do before they remove the flow supers? Should they harvest all the honey, even if it's not capped, before taking the supers off?
Okay, that depends a little bit on your storage. So if you want to take super boxes off that are partly filled, then you can store them in a cold area, which deep freeze is ideal, but perhaps it's pretty much a deep freeze where you are in the winter time anyway. So you're storing them in a cold space away from vermin and wax moth and things, and then you can put them back on the hive come springtime. So that's a good technique. Or if you don't have the ability to store the frames, you could, as you say, harvest what's left, let the bees clean the frames up, wash any remaining nectar out of the frames and let them dry, store them away for the winter. So you've got two options there depending on whether you can have access to a nice cold fridge or freezer.
So we always get this question too, why do you protect your whole body in a suit but you don't protect your hands?
Need a jump start, you know. If I don't get the odd sting, I'll fall asleep. It's like better than coffee. No, it's actually that no, I shouldn't joke about bee stings. Some people are very reactive and swell up a lot, and others even have like anaphylaxis, like a peanut allergy to bee stings. So protect yourself, wear your gloves if you're new to beekeeping, especially until you really get attuned. Now, I can feel they're a little bit stingy, this hive, and I'm aware enough to know when they are about to sting my hands, and you might notice me move them away a little bit as one tries to have a little go, but they're not grumpy enough for me to put my gloves on. The reason why I like to go no gloves is it just keeps the dexterity and ease of handling things. And I'm attuned in the beehive to know where to put my fingers. I'm not going to put them on a bee and get a sting. But when you're new to beekeeping, wear your gloves, because you don't have that ability yet. You're focused on other things and you're just mesmerised by the bees, and you might put your finger right on a bee when you're lifting a frame and get a sting and so on. So wear your gloves until you've learnt a bit more, and that way you'll have a more gentle start in your beekeeping. But I don't mind the odd sting on the hand, so I wear no gloves. If I reacted badly to bee stings, I would always be wearing my gloves. So it's a little bit up to you on that one, but a good idea to know your first aid. So there's a bee there. I can tell that mood isn't stinging, so I'm okay with that. They behave a little bit differently in an erratic kind of aggressive way if they're coming in for a sting. Okay. It's giving me a little nibble actually. But it's mandibles. Okay.
So could you explain, you talk about bee bread, what actually is bee bread?
So bee bread is a sourdough bread made out of pollen. So what happens is your forager bees head out to the flowers. As they approach the flowers, your static charge on the bee means pollen grains leap off the flowers all over to their hairy bodies. They even have hairs on their eyes. And then they will comb all of that pollen back to their hind legs, which we call the pollen baskets. So that's where you'll see the bees, the forager bees, returning to the hive with those nice brightly coloured balls of pollen. Then in the hive, those balls of pollen get pushed down the cells and they'll pack them nicely with pollen, all different colours. Then they'll add their enzymes, top it with honey and ferment it. And fermenting it, just like a sourdough bread, makes it more digestible, more easily digestible. And that is the primary food for the young developing worker brood.
Great, now Ken's tuning in from the New South Wales South Coast, so just down the road. I'm just wondering, Cedar, if the bees move the honey from the brood box that has been treated with Baverol to the super, is the honey okay to eat?
Okay, that's an interesting question. So, with Baverol, most of the world you're not allowed to use it while the honey super's on. I believe in Australia you are allowed to use it with the honey super on. Why? I'm not quite sure, but the reason why there's caution, they say you're not allowed to chew on the honeycomb anymore, is for those toxicity reasons. So you are putting a synthetic chemical in the hive, a miticide, and you want to avoid consuming that, and that's why they have those rules around not being able to chew on the honeycomb, and in other countries not having your honey super on. So I guess the answer is nothing really stops them moving some honey from the bottom to the top, and I guess it's your choosing as a beekeeper whether you want to use that or not, taking into account all of the literature and studies they've done on Baverol.
Thanks. Marianne, who tuned in before about the bottom board seeds on the classic hive, she was wondering, because they have these freezing temperature, should, instead of using the screen bottom board, put it on a flat bottom board that doesn't have a screen on it. Do you think that would be better?
So our bottom board or stand here has the integrated screen. If you've got the stand and our flow hive 2 base here like this one, then the tray does block that airflow up through the screen. So you'd have your tray in, and then you'd use the ventilation control down here. If you wanted it warmer, you'd put the vents down. So you flip the cover so the vents are down, and that'll limit airflow coming up and under that screen as long as your tray is in place. And that way you don't need to swap it out for a flat bottom board. Now if you've got a classic hive, there's a core flute slider that you put in the top position in order to limit your ventilation, and it pretty much becomes a flat bottom board then once you've got that slider in place. And having said all of that, there are people in Nebraska or in the UK in very cold winters using open mesh bottom boards with no blocker, and they say they never get a complaint from the bees. Doesn't make logical sense because you think, let's try and keep the hive warmer, but apparently you can run screen bottom boards even in those extreme cold areas completely open.
Great. Isaac did a harvest on his first on his first frame, and found the next morning that there was quite a lot of honey in the bottom tray. I'm not sure how much. Isaac's wondering, did he do something wrong? And a few people are tuning in. Maybe he should have put the key only a little bit in, not do the whole frame.
Yeah. Okay. So let's take a look at this frame here for an example. Now, what's happening is we're forming channels inside the comb, but there's multiple reasons why you could get some honey when you're harvesting spilling down here. And one of them is you could have a lot of capped honey that's really bulging out up top, and it could be really indented down the bottom, and you've got a pressure, head of pressure if you like, of honey above, and then as you harvest you might get some honey dribbling out of the capping. Another one is you could get wax build-up down here. Perhaps you did a quick close last time you were harvesting and the cells aren't quite in line, and there's a lot of wax build-up, particularly down the bottom here, limiting that honey flow into the trough area, and therefore some of it's coming out of the frame surface. You could also have different, you could have thixotropic honey, like setting like jelly down here in the frame with some liquid honey above it. So there's all of these reasons why you could get some honey spilling inside the hive. However, the bees are great at cleaning up honey, and if you've got your screen bottom board, it's not going to pool in there and drown any bees. It'll go through into the tray area. So it's not uncommon to get some honey, but if you're getting like litres of honey spilling into that tray or overflowing that tray down the bottom, then you may need to take a look at what's going on and fine-tune your setup, or look at the frames and get in contact, and we'll try and troubleshoot with you. Another tip is make sure you've got that 3-degree slope backwards, and we've got the level bubble on the side to help you find that. When the level's in the middle, you've got the right slope. Side to side, it's nice to have it levelish as well, more for the natural comb building, but it'll also assist any honey maybe spilling out of the side if the hive's leaning over a long way. And yeah, conventional beekeeping, I used to spill a lot of honey in the hives because my bees would build up into the migratory lids, a lot of comb. Every time I'd lift it, there'd be honey spilling everywhere, flowing down and out of the entrance, and the bees would simply just clean it up. So I never really was concerned about sometimes a bit of honey spilling in the hive, because the bees are really quite good at cleaning up that honey.
So the sun and partial shade about the beehive, what do you prefer, and what should you do if you can have partial shade? Is that a good thing to do?
Well, in an ideal world, you've got some nice afternoon shade in summer helping your hive regulate its temperature and not get too hot if you're in a really hot area. However, there's other things that'll probably be a higher priority for you if you're situating your hive in an urban backyard, for instance. The flight path is probably #1 priority, making sure the bees can get up and away without bothering anybody, without getting into the hair of your guests as they walk down the path and so on. So situating your hive for the flight path is probably #1. #2, if you've got a choice between full sun and full shade, I would always go full sun to limit pathogens like chalk brood building up in the hive. Now, if you have the opportunity to get some afternoon shade in summer, that's even better, and that would be an ideal scenario. Okay, let's now put the last frame back in, and I'll give you some tips on that. These bees have been accepting of my intrusion, but they are a bit annoyed about it. They're not really stinging me yet, but they're letting me know. Okay, we're going to add a bit of smoke just to remove the bees out of this area. Smoke's a great tool for moving bees when you need to. And then we're going to pop this frame back in. We were doing a flow frame inspection to show you how to go about it, but it's also just fun to have a look and see what's going on. And let's just have one more look at that frame. Gives us an idea of what the season's doing, where it's up to. It pretty much tells us what's going on the window, which you can see the honey starting to fill there. The frame's not full yet though, and that's what's going on here. The honey they're filling, but it's not full yet. So the windows give you a great idea of when it's time to harvest. But if you're curious, you want to get into your beekeeping and have a look, then you can pop the frames out as we're doing here, and putting them back in is a case. Oh, the main tip is to maintain that space by putting it on a lean like that as you roll it down, keeping it pressed up against the wood. And once you've got the rear in, you're keeping it pressed so you're maintaining that space as the frame drops. Now, interestingly, I've got some bees in the way there, so let's smoke them out of the way. But the actual frame next door I put back in, but I need to get it straight first. So let's come out and organise the previous frame, and we'll show you that once more. So that needs to come forward like that, so it's forming a nice flat window. And you can jump out of the way. There we go. Watching that point there, trying not to damage any bees as we go. Now let's do that again. So our frames are organised already. We have them pulled across like that. Now the tip is we're sliding that end bar against the wooden cross member there on an angle like that to make sure it's not going to jump out of line with the other frames. And then you've got to get the tail in like that, and bingo, we're right in the pocket where we need to be. Just need to press the frames down, and the bees are a bit grumpy about me dropping the frame. Then we'll give them a little smoke and we'll put their hive back together. Next, the inner cover goes on top, and we'll go back and have a look at our honey harvest, check that we're not getting a jar full of bees. I think Sophie covered up the jar for us, which was nice of her. And here we go. We can then put our covers back on, making sure you put the window covers on so that you don't get solar heating from all the sun coming in. Roof's on like that. Key access cover goes in here, flicking any bees out of the way. And then we have the rear cover, which is also the one we use for harvesting. Making sure there's no bees there, and our flow frame inspection is done. Let's go and have a look and see if we got any honey. I can see some from here, looking good. And I can see right in the window of the hive, the honey's drained out from beneath their feet here. The bees are starting their process of chewing away at that capping, and they'll rebuild those cells, start storing nectar, and the whole process starts again. And look at that beautiful honey. We can take back to the table. It needs no further processing. It's just only gravity has led it from out of the hive into the jar. Hasn't touched any machinery or processing equipment, and that's why we get that feedback. And there's even been studies to show that honey harvested from a flow hive retains its floral notes more so than harvesting in conventional ways. So if you're someone who really appreciates good honey, then this is a great way to harvest it, and you'll not only get higher floral note retention in your honey, but you'll get a lot of different honeys as you harvest individual frames, which has been an amazing joy. We didn't set out to do that, but because the system allows you to harvest individual frames, you can fill up jars with all different flavors of honey and different colors of honey from the one hive. And that's what you're seeing up here, seeing lighter ones and darker ones as the bees are foraging on different things. And in the springtime we get very light, almost clear yellow honey, and in the winter we get almost honey that's so dark it's just about black and you can't see through it, and everything in between, which is one of the big joys of harvesting honey. And the flow hive just allows you to isolate them like that. Key goes in, top slot now, turn it back to a 90, and that's all we need to do to push all of those flow frames parts back together. Leave it there for a minute or two, making sure they all seat down, and that will be important so that the bees have true hexagons. If they're sitting up like that, then they'll build a bunch of wax there, which will limit that flow next time. Thanks for watching. We're going to do a quick swap like this, and that's really the only mess to clean up, which is very different from harvesting in the conventional way. And there we have a beautiful jar of honey. Same time next week, and thank you so much to all of you that have been really helping answer so many of the questions in the thread. Also let us know what you'd like us to tune in on next week, and if you do want a dedicated online course with experts from all over the world, high quality video training, have a look at the beekeeper.org, which is a site we set up with so many experts contributing all different climates around the world, and it gets rave reviews and is also an amazing fundraiser. So if you want an online course, have a look at the beekeeper.org. Otherwise, I'll be here next week to help answer your questions, and let us know what you'd like us to cover.